Welcome to Blended Scotch Reviews. This is Stab the Dragon on Wednesday, September 18th, 2024, coming to you from Fort Worth, Texas. And tonight we're going to study the most popular whiskey in Scotland. On this channel, I'm studying blended Scotch and conducting a blended Scotch tournament to find out what my favorite blended Scotch whiskeys are out of a field of at least 16 whiskeys. Some of these are worldwide favorites, while others are lesser known. Some are somewhere in the middle. Along the way, I'll also examine some of the single malts because they are key to understanding these popular blends. So far, I have studied Dewar's White and Isle of Skye 8, with the smoky Isle of Skye being the winner in that competition. But when I tested the two key single malts, Talisker Storm and Aberfeldy 12, it was the Aberfeldy that prevailed. And I think with either of those competitions is just going to depend on which day of the week I did the test. They're all good. Tonight's whiskey is the famous Grouse. And since 1979, the famous Grouse has been Scotland's favorite whiskey. This whiskey is owned by the Edrington Group, which also owns Cutty Sark, Highland Park, Glenturret, and the Macallan. This 750 milliliter bottle comes in at 40% ABV or 80 proof. It costs $21.99 at Specs, $20.59 at Goody Goody, and $29.99 for a 1.75 liter at Total Wine. I don't know that they sell a 750 there at Total Wine. I think I paid something like $27, however, for this bottle. And the small store a friend of mine owns in a small town in central Texas, Hyco, on a family trip last year. My score for this whiskey was an 86. Letter grade, which focuses more on taste, an A-. From the website, the nose says candied fruits, buttery shortbread, citrus peel, with me on the nose. My nose doesn't work all that great, but I'm going to add some honey and flowers to that. The palate, according to the website, tasting notes, soft, warm breath with bright, fruity notes, smooth and perfectly balanced. And I'm going to add some honey sweetness there. And also, I got a very thin line of ash towards the finish. It was very nice, but it was just a thin line of that. And I think that's probably due to the Highland Park 12 influence. Now, the recommendation. This famous Grouse is the #1 Scotch consumed in Scotland, and I find it to be a wonderful drink and recommend it highly for those who are budget conscious but want to get into Scotch, which can be quite expensive. If you're a bourbon drinker who loves the sweeter bourbons like Old Forester, Buffalo Trace, or Benchmark, this may be a good intro Scotch for you because it's so sweet. If you're new to whiskey in general, I think this is a great, gentle, sweet introduction to whiskey. I highly recommend the famous Grouse. Now, for the details. History, up to 5 points. It seems that Perth, Scotland, in the early 1800s was the birthplace for a lot of whiskeys that would become famous blends, which we still drink today. When we studied Dewar's White, we saw that John Dewar was from Perth. If we study Bell's blend, we'll see that Arthur Bell was also from Perth about the same time. But preceding those two, by a couple of decades, you've got Matthew Gloag, another grocer who dealt in wine and spirits. As a young man, Gloag was a butler and a cellarman. That is, he was in charge of handling the wine for Scone Palace in Perth. Scone Palace was the scene of Scottish kings for hundreds of years. As a grocer, he became quite successful, and in 1842, Queen Victoria was passing through town, and she stayed at the Scone Palace. Gloag's grocery got to cater the meals because of his connections to the palace in his younger years. Eventually, Gloag's son William took over the business, and William had many years of experience in business, and he loved quality whiskey. The distilleries that he was using to create the Gloag blend were Highland Park, Macallan, and Glen Ross. Perth was the gateway to the Highlands. There was a new railroad line that ran through there, so tourism, fishing and hunting, grouse hunting in particular, became a huge draw for traffic into the town. Grouse is a game bird in Scotland that's related to our pheasant and turkey, but it's a little bit smaller. Some of the larger varieties can get up to 12 or 14 pounds, which is, small turkey size for us. By 1896, William Gloag's nephew, Matthew, there's going to be a lot of Matthews in the family. They had many years experience in the wine industry, and he took over the business, and they had been producing Gloag's Perth whiskey, known for its attractive label that featured two famous Perth landmarks, the Smeaton Bridge over the River Tay and St. Matthew's Church. I find it fascinating, as a Southern Baptist who used to be a teetotaler, a whiskey company would advertise using the image of a local church on its label. But also notice that the label was noted for those visiting local attractions. A local brand identified with its local landmarks, and that became a big seller. A whiskey capturing the spirit of its locale. That's how it should be. But then in 1896, William Gloag changed that famous label and the name of the whiskey. He changed it to Grouse whiskey, and he put a drawing of the grouse that his daughter Philippa had drawn. I think changing the name from Gloag's Perth whiskey to Grouse whiskey was good marketing. Gloag's grog just doesn't sound all that appeasing and appetizing. Now I'm going to read a quote from this book, The Famous Grouse, put out by the whiskey company itself. So the print in here is pretty vague, but no doubt it was popular, but Matthew was shortly to surpass its success with what proved to be his masterstroke, launching Grouse whiskey in 1896. The appeal to the sporting fraternity was immediately obvious, and instead of limiting his whiskey by association with a business that was still essentially a provincial concern, he shrewdly employed a symbol that could stand for all of Scotland. It was a tactic that was to stand the test of time. And then Matthew celebrated and enjoyed the great whiskey, and he wrote of the whiskey, "Scotsmen the world over use it neat to warm them in cold, diluted to refresh them when warm, to revive them when exhausted, as a medicine in sickness, as an aid to digestion, as a sedative for sleeplessness, and universally to celebrate the meeting with or parting with friends, confident that used in moderation it will suit the occasion as nothing else will do, and with nothing but good effect. Millions of men in every clime have found that these Scotsmen are right." So thank you, Mr. Gloag. Now, in 1905, Gloag changed things up yet again. In the UK, the date August 12th is a holiday, as it's the opening day of hunting season, grouse season. On that day in 1905, Gloag changed the name of the whiskey to the Famous Grouse, and he kept that glorious red grouse that Philippa had drawn on the label to deliberately market their whiskey to the sportsmen coming to the Scottish Highlands. The brand stayed in the family through ups and downs in the Scottish whiskey industry until 1970, when tragedy struck and the Gloag family lost the current elders of the family in an accident. The inheritor, named appropriately Matthew Gloag, was faced with a new inheritance tax that could not be paid, so he sold the family business to Highland Distillers, with whom the family had done business for over a century. Highland added some needed heft to the marketing, and the famous Grouse started growing rapidly. And by 1979, the brand was the #1 selling brand in Scotland, where it has remained to this day. In 1999, Highland Distillers was purchased by the Edrington Group, which itself was privately owned, not a huge public company. Besides owning Cutty Sark, the Edrington Group owns the same two distilleries that have always been a part of the famous Grouse, Highland Park and the Macallan, and now also Glen Turret. But notice how tragedy and the tax laws of Great Britain led to some serious changes in who owned this whiskey. So for history, 5 out of 5 points for the famous Grouse. Bottle, label, and marketing. This is a clear, untinted, round, straight-sided bottle until it gets to the top, and then you got kind of a weird saddle shape or something going on here. There's some embossing down here at the bottom. Established 1800 is what that says. There's a metal screw-on cap. You've got also in the embossing, there's a little feather there. I guess you can see that. And then, of course, the red grouse there. I love the label. I mean, this is just, very classy, outdoorsy label. So Matthew Gloag's name is written on the neck piece here. Matthew Gloag. In 2023 and 2024, I have heard some radio advertisements for the famous Grouse here in Fort Worth on WBAP 820 AM radio. And this is the only whiskey I ever remember advertising on the radio. So 5 out of 5 points due to the radio spots and the label. Composition. The whiskeys contained in this blend are Highland Park, the Macallan, North British distilleries, but then also there may be some Glen Turret in there as well, since that's the home base for famous Grouse. It's also aged in sherry cask, comes in at 40% ABV or 80 proof. So for composition, 13 out of 15 points. The appearance of this whiskey. From the website, it says golden, clear, bright, very light. I give it a 3 out of 5 points there. And 3 is generous. I mean, that's a pretty light colored, maybe straw colored, gold colored. So 3 out of 5 for appearance. Just aesthetically, I prefer darker whiskeys. The nose. The website talks about candied fruits, buttery shortbread. I do get the citrus peel, maybe a little bit of the candied fruits. I would add honey and some floral notes. All in all, it's faint, but I can smell it. And so for me, my nose doesn't work very well. If I can smell something, then it's going to be an 8. If I don't smell anything, it's just a 7. So this is an 8. Now for the palate. Again, the website says soft, warm breath, whatever that means, with bright fruity notes, smooth and perfectly balanced. Malty, sweet, honey, fruit, some spiciness. Let's see. That's my tasting notes. I get the maltiness, the sweet honey, the fruit. Just a thin line of, I don't know if it's peat or what coming in from the Highland Park. A little bit of an ashiness there, right? I mean, it's just a thin line through there, but it's there. And that really enriches this. I mean, it's very sweet. It's one of the sweetest Scotch whiskeys I've ever tried. But the sweetness is not heavy. It's on a lighter note, that you get that floral thing going on there. So it's not an overwhelming sweetness. It's not artificial in any way. There are some bourbons that strike me as heavy-handed with the sweetness, and it's almost artificial. Buffalo Trace, uh, Benchmark, Four Roses, uh, those are very, very sweet to me. Old Forester, and it's almost kind of a sickening sweet. It's artificial, but this is magnificent in its sweetness. I mean, this is one of my favorites, definitely. It's a light, natural sweetness that, while it's predominates, it's not overbearing. And the sherry casks add to this sweetness, I'm sure. Although I can't really taste the fruitiness there. The maltiness hits me right away. There is a spiciness to it, as well as that thin line of peat or ash. So 22 of 25 points for the palate. The mouthfeel, burn, and finish. Moderate mouthfeel, certainly not thin. It's kind of a medium finish with the malty and spicy notes going along. You know, there's a little bit of a tobacco note or ashiness that, again, it's not as heavy-handed as peat, but you know, some whiskeys give me a tobacco note, and that may be what that is, or just a little bit of ash. There's a very slight burn, a tingle that's very pleasant, very appropriate. Certainly no ethanol here, nothing negative at all. This is an exceptionally easy sipper. The balance is such that the flavors hold together from the nose to the front palate, mid palate, and finish. There's no harsh edge here at all. It's like the website says, it's kind of well-rounded, uh, soft, and perfectly balanced. Yeah, I would agree with that. So mouthfeel, burn finish, 12 out of 15 points. Now, neat or mixer. This is an excellent neat pour. I really like it neat, especially, you know, if you're new to Scotch, even new to whiskey. But I think its flavors are a bit delicate for much of a cocktail. I tend to think it would get lost. I tried a couple of simple cocktails with this. I did a Scotch and soda with a couple of ounces of Grouse and then a little bit of my Topo Chico here. And in a highball glass with ice. And I found the drink refreshing, but the Grouse kind of lost all of its sweetness. Sweetness disappeared, and I was left with just the malt flavor and a little bit of the floral, and again that thin trace of ashiness. And so, you know, it was a refreshing glass on a hot Texas afternoon, but it just lost most of its flavor. So then I tried it with 7-Up or Sprite, and again it just kind of, it was nice, but it just kind of loses too much of its flavor, I think. So for me, it's a little bit weak as a mixer. But again, those are just two very simple household cocktails, you know, so nothing fancy there. 3 points on the neater mixer. Price, value, and availability, 10 out of 10, because you know, you can get a 1.75 for under $30 at Total Wine. Specs, Had the 750 for $21.99, goody goody at $20.59. So it's got a good price and it's readily available most places. I mean, the small liquor store in Hyco where I got this, Hyco's in the middle of nowhere. Uh, they had it. So it's widely available. It's very good quality for a great price. No wonder this is a top whiskey in Scotland. So for price, value, and availability, 10 for 10. Bonus points. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5 for bonus points because it's got a great history, nice looking label, uh, very good taste. It's been advertised, it's readily available. So really, this whiskey offered a lot, gave a lot. So bonus points 5. My total score is an 86. Letter grade A minus, and that's more, letter grade is more about the taste, the enjoyability factor of drinking this. And this is going to be a favorite. I mean, this is my second bottle of this actually that I've had. And I just will always have a bottle of Famous Grouse. It's great. Really recommend it. So many, and here's my recommendation. So many Scotch snobs, those advanced whiskey experts, disparage the blended Scotch. However, historically and in the here and now, blended Scotch comprises about 90% of all Scotch whiskey sold in the world. That says a lot. This Famous Grouse is the #1 Scotch consumed by the Scotch. There you go. I find it to be a wonderful drink and recommend it, especially if you're budget conscious. But if you want to get into Scotch, which can be expensive, uh, you want to start with something that's not going to, tear your pocketbook up. And Famous Grouse is just a great way to get into Scotch. Now, if you're a bourbon drinker, like I was, and you love the sweetness of bourbons, then this is a great transition into the realm of Scotch. And that's really what you need. Now, you don't need to think, well, I want a Scotch that tastes like bourbon. Scotch is a different animal altogether. But if you like the sweeter bourbons, then I think Famous Grouse is the way to go to break into Scotch. And if you're new to whiskey in general, this is gentle. Okay, this is a sweet, gentle introduction to whiskey. So I highly recommend the Famous Grouse. Now, I told you about the composition of the Famous Grouse, how it's got Highland Park in there, it's got the Macallan. It probably has some Glenturret. So what we're going to do is I've got a bottle of Highland Park 12, and I'm going to sample a pour of this to see if I can find any relationship to the blend from the single malt. Here, actually, the nose on the Famous Grouse is stronger than the nose on the Highland Park. I'm getting just a little bit of that ashiness, but not much else. So really, for my nose, which is inadequate, the Famous Grouse has the better nose. Let's go to the taste. And there's that ashiness. And on the finish, there's some definitely lingering peat. So I think this is going to be where, although Glenturret has some peat too, so I'm not sure what they do with that. But, I'm pretty sure this is where that thin line of ash or peat comes from in the Famous Grouse. Highland Park is one of my favorites. This is my second bottle of this Highland whiskey. But it, to me, it's got more of a burn, more of the spicy notes, definitely more of the ashiness and the peat. So I can see how that contributes to the famous grouse. All right, we are done with the famous grouse for now, but what will we do next time in Blended Scotch Reviews? Coming up next, we've got Teacher's Highland Cream. Teacher's Highland Cream. And so I'll review that one. And then after that, we're going to do the head-to-head competition for the tournament between Famous Grouse and Teacher's Highland Cream. So that's what's coming up in Blended Scotch Reviews. This is Stab the Dragon, out here.